everybody, my name is Luke Mar and this is HauteLeMode, and today on HauteLeMode we are coming to you with a video about Balenciaga's Haute Couture collection for 2022, because Balenciaga only does one a year, so you know what I mean, they set themselves apart in many a way. Now I know that it's mid-September and I'm putting a video out about a collection that came out in early July, but like Haute Couture, handmade, crafted, you know, detailed, the review should reflect that. It just took me a long time, you know what I mean? There's a lot that's gone on since July. And I wanted to finish the review. I feel like I learned a lot in the process of making the review, and I just felt it was important in the middle of London Fashion Week already, but like, shit happens, okay? So without further ado, let's get into why Balenciaga Haute Couture wasn't as horrible as you think. Now, Balenciaga was without a doubt the most watched collection of the fall 2022 Haute Couture season. But was it for a good reason? Demna, the creative director, showcased a second Balenciaga Haute Couture collection, as Balenciaga is currently only presenting one Haute Couture collection a year, with last year's being the first Haute Couture collection from the Spanish heritage house since 1968. And hopefully I'll stop saying Balenciaga Haute Couture collection again and again. But something that Monsieur Balenciaga is more than likely rolling in his grave about is, well, the use of celebrities, models, in the salon of Avenue Georges V for a fashion house that really truly was about craft of creating clothing. The use of celebrities to get attention and press seems to be the absolute antithesis of the foundation of Balenciaga. But in Demna's world, it might have been the perfect strategy to attract new clients and rebirth the house. This season was the 51st Balenciaga Haute Couture collection, and it started far differently than Demna's first Haute Couture. Instead of the oversized but rather smart tailoring of ultra-luxe vicuña wool that honored Monsieur Balenciaga's commercially viable staples, Demna began in his now signature gimp-like styles. It was most definitely jarring to watch the doors of the Avenue Georges V salon swing open and have the cast of American Horror Story Murder House start an Haute Couture collection. But to be fair, Women's Wear Daily reported that, quote, the designer said he decided to inject more of himself into a sophomore couture effort and follow his instincts more. Now, this is not new for Demna's Balenciaga. If you can remember, his debut menswear collection was an ode to Monsieur Balenciaga and his obsession with suiting. Demna went as far as to reference Balenciaga's tendency to borrow jackets from friends like Hubert de Givenchy in order to make them fit better. And rather than actually finishing them by fixing them, he left them in a deconstructed state even after his passing. But the menswear collection that followed the spring 2017 debut saw t-shirts tapping Bernie Sanders' political logos, as well as baggy suits paired with the now infamous Triple S sneaker. And I think that we're seeing a repeat here. Demna paid his tribute to Monsieur Balenciaga, but now it's taking a much different turn. And that different turn began with those gimp suits as previously mentioned. But instead of them being in the usual latex or leather, they were made of Japanese neoprene. Now, neoprene is a fabric developed by the oil and gas tycoons, the DuPonts, in the 1930s. But it could easily be destroyed and was also legitimately derived from crude oils that you're putting on your body. That is until in the 1960s, when the Japanese company Yamamoto developed their own version of neoprene that they said is, quote, eco-friendly and sustainable due to its chemical makeup being 99.7% calcium carbonate. The manner in which it is produced also helps that. Chloroprene rubber, otherwise known as neoprene, that is made by Yamamoto, is thus one of the premier neoprene makers. And essentially, Demna is making here Haute Couture wetsuits. But instead of just making the standard jumpsuit cuts for water sports, he has also revolutionized wetsuits by making them into more fashionable cuts at the level of Haute Couture. To be fair, I saw these looks initially and thought, how idiotic. But upon doing my research, I've realized I'm kind of the idiot. Two dresses do us the courtesy of showcasing why Demna's work on the surface might look vapid and silly, but these two dresses are some of the first times we have seen neoprene be turned into something more slinky and fitted. Neoprene had its moment in the late 2000s and mid-2010s in fashion. I'm sure many of you probably remember, but on the runway, it rarely tightly wrapped itself around the wearer's body, and instead was usually quite boxy and oversized, and even appeared on Balenciaga's spring 2008 runway when Nicole Kidman showed floral neoprene jackets and shorts. But even those were not as compressed as Demna's. A fitted calf-length dress was the first one we saw and was made up of a corset with boning poking through, as well as gloved sleeves and neoprene leggings underneath, while a fitted gown version with train carried all the same characteristics with the exception of its length. Now here's why these looks are positively brilliant. They take the wetsuit, which is usually in that jumpsuit cut that sticks to your body for aerodynamic purposes, and reconfigures these sort of styles as dresses, not only touching on the wetsuit characteristics, but also on the mainstream love of bodycon dresses. If you're wondering why the looks are black, well, it's probably because black neoprene is stronger and more durable than other neoprene colors usually. Black carbon is added to initially white or beige rubber, as carbon black allows for UV radiation protection and will absorb heat and disperse it equally amongst itself, which stops a faster degradation of the product and also keeps the wearer a little bit warmer when they're doing cold water activities. And Demna knows his history, as Balenciaga was a master with the color black. The color was a medium for him to transform and experiment with, and every collection he made sure to feature at least one black piece that he constructed by hand. While Demna might be seen as disrespectful to Maison Balenciaga, he's actually an advocate for its house codes, but knows that in order to do that, one must also evolve. I know I'm getting like very technical in fabrics and all that stuff, but I think that haute couture in today's age is not just about intricately constructed garments or gorgeously embroidered work, but also research and development with different fabrics and textiles in order to make them incredibly chic, but also utilitarian. And Balenciaga himself loved a little fabric development, you know what I mean? Like Gazar, that's him. To cap off this neoprene rant though, Demna might not follow most of Balenciaga's directories in the strictest way, but he is upholding Balenciaga's dedication to pushing clothing as a craft forward through experimentation. The collection then moves towards a more traditional haute couture fabric, tweed. Or at least we are led to believe that. But in all actuality, this is a trompe-l'oeil effect, as the first two dresses of this style we see are made in viscose jersey, which would mean they are knit dresses, whereas true tweed is woven. The jersey was actually embroidered in order to make it look like it has the plaid motif of the traditional Scottish or twill, which is its true name. The short black version feels like it might actually find a customer who yearns for Chanel, but doesn't want to pay a Chanel price for haute couture, and one that will be able to move just a little bit more freely, while the blue knee-length version feels a tad more conservative and might entice a more experienced customer still on the fence. Two floor-length gowns with trompe-l'oeil tweed motifs then appear, but are made in much more luxe fabrics, with the white being a silk organza and the black being in a cashmere, which explains the difference in the texture. Now, Cristobal Balenciaga was a rather frequent user of tweeds, as they often accentuated his skirt suits. Harper's Bazaar wrote in November 1948, "Tweed suits look as if they had been turned out by a sporting tailor." The jacket considerably shorter and as tight as a riding habit. The skirt very narrow, very elegant. Another from Elle in March of 1964 reads, "A suit that barely touches the body, in beige tweed, with a short jacket and skirt with large pleats." While tweed might be associated with Coco Chanel, Balenciaga was always fond of using it, as his clients were fond of these molded skirt suits that they could wear while going about their day. Demna knows that very few people, besides Chanel clientele, are wearing tweed, but that doesn't mean he can't fake a tweed to get the same effect, without having to deal with the hot fabric. The man knows his house codes. He just chooses to reimagine them in his own way. A blue faux feather floor-length gown then appears, and I'm not entirely sure, but I have a feeling, just a feeling, it's inspired by a famous Balenciaga piece called the Cocoa Dress, which was shot by Irving Penn in 1950, and it's spelled cocoa as in like cocoa powder. The dress was made up of a pleated organza skirt that might be where Demna found inspiration for the shape of these feathers. He's been playing around with faux feathers in recent collections, like the last haute couture show, and looks that we have seen on his muse, Kim Kardashian. But these faux feathers are incredibly different than Balenciaga's own work with true feathers, which were made up of shaved ostrich feather dresses or in vibrant feather boas. And that leads me to believe this cocoa dress is the true inspiration. And it means that Demna once again is utilizing the Balenciaga archives for inspiration. What followed were crinkled t-shirts that were certainly something that wouldn't have fit Cristobal's vision of fashion, but while they more than likely remind me of crusty t-shirts you would find hidden underneath a man's bed, they might actually be a rather smart and cheeky reference to Balenciaga too. Balenciaga loved texture, and it wasn't strange to see drapery of all kinds. Some were a reference to the decadent times like the Victorian era, like this 3/4 gown from spring 1955, while others were radical for the choice of textile, like this draped woolen palo coat from the winter 1950 collection. That draped waves of fabric on the sleeves and on the shoulders. So why couldn't Demna, whose time at Maison Margiela, where wrinkled fabric appearing on the runway was not unheard of, recreate this drapery, but in his own ironic and sick little way? We should also mention the handbags that have appeared throughout the collection. They are a collaboration between Balenciaga and the Danish luxury speaker company Bang & Olufsen, titled speaker bags. They work both as a functional handbag and portable speaker that has up to 18 hours of battery life and are made of aluminum in Denmark, but wrapped in leather by Balenciaga. A black sleeveless gown followed, and its construction followed the form-fitting skirt suits that Balenciaga Haute Couture was known for, with nipped-in waist but tapped into the sustainable movement going on. The dress is actually made of upcycled belts, which is why those ravines take that vertical shape. While this style seems more like a continuation of the Martin Margiela recycling ethos, Balenciaga did, create large frothy gowns that looked like they'd been treated with multiple tourniquets, not with the purpose to stop blood, but to create circular shapes of fabric in a layered form. Now, Demna did recreate one of Balenciaga's original designs for the fall 2017 collection, so it's not a total stretch to think such a thing, but the Margiela nod is probably a little bit more, well, probable. A few high-collared coats, as they were called, were less showy than some of the other styles we have seen thus far, but they again are a great history lesson for the Balenciaga Haute Couture customer, at least, on the history of the house. It's an expensive history lesson, but you gotta wear it for some time. These coats were all faux fur, as Balenciaga has stopped its use of real fur as of fall 2022, even though real fur is an actual important house code of the brand. But again, Demna is not looking to isolate his animal-loving clients, and he is also looking to modernize the brand, all while trying to keep the house codes alive, which these coats are a result of. The first is a brown and black coat, which is hand embroidered to give a trompe-l'oeil leopard skin motif. Balenciaga was a user of real leopard skin in coats, and while by today's standards it's incredibly unseemly, and I agree, there was a culture of wearing exotic animal furs throughout the 20th century, which was upheld by many haute couture houses. They were incredibly expensive and would have been considered an exclusive skin throughout the world, but in order to keep that same air of luxury without killing leopards, Demna's leopard coats don't grow their own spots, they just happen to have them embroidered on. And whoever said a leopard can't change their spots hasn't been to the house of Balenciaga this season. Another brown faux fur coat followed, and a white version also emerged, with both being hand embroidered to mirror fur, but in reality, they look rather synthetic and bathrobe-esque. Difficult to perfect the texture of real fur in its non-real counterpart, but that's what Demna must keep working towards. Well, that's the whole reason that haute couture exists. Balenciaga haute couture collections were full of fur styles and were some of the most exciting and ravishing styles in each collection. So for Demna to falter here, it's hard to watch, not only because the styles look cheap, but because Balenciaga was a master with the medium. If we look at an ensemble from Balenciaga's 1965 collection, we can see he developed his own version of faux fur by using a mohair called papacha, which was knotted by hand to recreate the tufts of real fur. Almost 70 years later, we should have something that feels and looks almost real, no? Now, Monsieur Balenciaga was a perfectionist to the end. Demna must keep that energy alive, as I've said, otherwise it's just a real besmirching of the brand. The styles that came after, though, were Demna staying true to the house of Balenciaga's ethos, aka experimenting with shape and silhouette. The first was a red maxi dress with a sharp angular collar that was visibly pushing away from the body at the back. Demna took this red satin and draped it beautifully to create texture that then allowed these angular panels to push away from the body, almost like wings. These wings also allowed for the back to be exposed, and from there we can see the satin fabric is tied and creates the train that drags behind the wearer. Demna's tailoring of this gown is rather nice to see and doesn't stray too far from Balenciaga's original vision, as we can see in the image from Balenciaga's Summer 1963 collection. The other dress is what really excited me though, as its name, the Shark Dress, gives me absolute chills. Because this is the development of odd silhouettes that is a hallmark of the house of Balenciaga. That's why the girls wrote about him so much. The winter 1967 Balenciaga collection saw the advent of the envelope dress, which consists of 4 sharp angular panels of fabric that looked as if they had been folded together and then all tapered down towards the model's knee. It seems that Demna has experimented with his own take on avant-garde Balenciaga shapes, as the Shark Dress is a 4-length pink silk dress that has a sharp angle that sprouts out of the back, starting right below the bum. It is aptly named the Shark Dress, I'll stop now, because it looks like the first dorsal fin of a shark, which strikes fear into the hearts of many who would see it. The, quote, fin is rather large, as it seems to be the width of the model, or even a little bit larger, and it is curved and allows anyone tall enough to see that it is exposing the back. Like Balenciaga's own curved edges of the envelope dress, Demna brilliantly takes an iconic Balenciaga silhouette and makes it his own, and might even inspire Steven Spielberg to give Jaws 4 a go. Now, for those wondering why someone would make a dress like this and what's the point if it isn't going to sell, well, the original envelope dress by Balenciaga only had 2 sales, okay? And one was even returned because the client couldn't figure out how to pee in it, okay? So, needless to say, the Shark Dress might only be for 1 or 2 people, but it's great to see Demna flex his creative construction skills in the collection. Monsieur Balenciaga did it, and the envelope dress is one of his most iconic dresses, where like, why can't the Shark Dress be the same for Demna? Okay, that's how I feel. The next dress was made up of a silver embroidery that looked as if it had crystallized on the fabric like the interior of Elsa's winter ice palace. But this dress isn't really a standout in the grand scheme of this collection. So you're probably saying, look, Luke, why are you discussing it? Well, I think you already know, because this is where the celebrity aspect of the Balenciaga collection began. Because this is Christine Quinn, former cast member of the Netflix hit show Selling Sunset. Celebrities on the runway, again, it's far from new, but for Balenciaga's Haute Couture collection to do it, it's a choice. It's a hot take. Haute Couture clients are known to not want to share looks with celebrities across the board. It doesn't matter which house they're buying from. Some will even allegedly, rescind their orders for Haute Couture if they find out it will be worn by a celebrity. To the point where Haute Couture houses for decades have kept logs of everybody that buys everything, so they know where and when and where and who and how things are getting to the client, so the clients don't show up and wear the exact same dress because they'd be livid because they just paid how much for the dress. So why dress a Netflix reality star when you're supposed to be courting the most elusive and exclusive clients? Well, Demna isn't looking to revive the secrecy and exclusivity of Balenciaga, and I think that's kind of evident. Many of the brands that currently do haute couture have been doing it consecutively for quite some time. Chanel since at least the 1980s, but again, there was periods, the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s for that. Dior since 1947, Valentino since the 1970s, and all of these have had loyal customers come as the decades rolled on. Balenciaga has a large gap in between when its haute couture was in place and its rebirth, and many clients have either passed or aren't going to dive right back, considering they were getting the originals. But Demna still has to bring in new clients, otherwise it's a very expensive show and advertising deal. And instead of keeping the hush-hush mentality that once encircled Avenue Georges V, he has opted to go in the direct opposite direction, instead using celebrity as a way to garner potential clients' attention. The brand seems to have found a clientele already, as this very chic woman in a 50th haute couture collection skirt suit proves on the live stream. She was an icon, you know what I mean? It was like Michelle Yeoh, Northwest, and her. For me. But Demna wants to open couture up to more people, and this seems to be his way of doing it. While I know Mr. Balenciaga would have found it very insightly to have celebrities on the runway, we don't live in 1968 and brands have had to adapt. It doesn't make me personally, oh my god, so happy either, but I get it. And if seeing celebrities walk very poorly in Avenue Georges V salon is the thing that will keep Balenciaga haute couture alive once more, I won't complain. Okay, actually I probably will, but like not as much as I normally would. Another feather look then flocked the runway, although this too was made up of faux textiles, as the faux fur band at Balenciaga might have also included feathers as well. The dress's silhouette seems to follow a conical shape, and the feathers are rather large and stiff, but again, the issue of looking real rears its ugly head. Feathers usually move with the body in gorgeous ways, but the faux feathers are taut and barely move even as the model walks, which makes it difficult to find the fantastical elements of them. Again, working tirelessly with the manufacturers of these faux feathers will be in Balenciaga's best interest, and not doing it is going to be to the detriment. This silk organza dress might benefit from even trying to recreate Cristobal Balenciaga's more wispy, floating feathers, rather than something larger and harsher until Demna and his atelier have mastered them. Coat dresses in the signature hourglass silhouette were lovely, with one being in wool and the other in satin. Demna has been making these hourglass coats since his debut collection in ready-to-wear, but they do harken back to Balenciaga's own very fitted skirt suits that became the go-to style for clients to purchase. Balenciaga's own hourglass figures followed the waist rather closely, which clients enjoyed, but Demna's silhouette has always emphasized the waist and padded out the hips as well. It seems that the double-breasted styles also have provenance at Balenciaga, and whether or not clients will bite doesn't mean that Demna has strayed far from the brand whatsoever. The next look was a yellow pleated cocktail gown worn by none other than British pop star Dua Lipa. The dress is made up of a silk taffeta which has been draped in a diagonal direction to create a swagged texture. The asymmetrical strap that looks like the fabric was ringed or wrung tightly like a cleaning rag was an interesting approach, but the side train panels that followed Lipa as she strode down the hallway were okay. There are elements of this dress that Demna nailed, aka the draping of the taffeta, as Balenciaga did himself drape, but it was usually in stiffer fabrics like wool or taffeta or gazar, as they held Balenciaga's voluminous work well. Now, where Demna made his version of haute couture known was in the fitted cocktail silhouette, which I understand from a wanting the style to sell perspective, but it doesn't seem that it's fully fleshed out. Demna has to continue to make these looks something a client or audience member doesn't just gloss over, which he did through having the British Albanian pop star wear the look. But the dress, as we all know, should speak for itself in its entirety. And it does, but it's a whimper, and we need more of a roar. Now, Demna's brilliance shines through in this next look, as it is both an homage to a past Balenciaga look while tweaking it in his cheeky way. The bustier belle dress in green technical silk twill was worn by Bella Hadid, who normally I wouldn't mention, but considering the star-studded affair, it's worth counting her as one. The dress that Bella wore is Demna's version of Balenciaga's own, quote, amphora dress from the spring 1959 collection, which was named and shaped in the fashion of Greco-Roman vases called amphoras that held milk, wine, or oil. We can see that the dress's fitted waist and exaggerated hips emulates the shape of the vase quite well, and more than likely the model's arms would recreate the handles. Now, this dress has been explored by Demna before, in his fall 2017 collection, where he looked at a few different intriguing Balenciaga haute couture concoctions and recreated them in a much more authentic manner. But for this collection, he recreated the front of the gown to match almost perfectly with the original style. But the back of the dress is only a cocktail dress, showing that the front of the design is only a facade to make the viewer believe it's a full amphora dress. Demna has done this before with his last haute couture collection, creating a facade gown front and exposing wide leg slacks when the look is seen from the back, which many might find to be ridiculous, but it's really a rather smart reference to Cristobal himself. A report from legendary editor Carmel Snow of Harper's Bazaar from the Balenciaga Winter 1951 collection reads, and I quote, "These coats and suit jackets have fitted fronts and loose backs," and shows images of a fitted front jacket and a very loose back, proving that Balenciaga himself was unafraid to play with facades. It's just a little bit, more old school. Demna's facade is quite deep though, as he is tasked with both keeping the spirit of Cristobal Balenciaga's work alive, but also must relate to a new customer almost 60 years later. In order to do that, he recreates the glamorous world of bourgeois ball galas, but twists it with what his client is more likely to wear, aka a tight-fitted cocktail dress. It may seem like the most ridiculous dress of the whole collection, but it is truly a masterpiece in disguise. Now, Demna's muse, Kim Kardashian, then sauntered out in what was dubbed the Bodysuit Dress, which is probably a reference both to Kim Kardashian's body, and maybe even her line of shapewear called Skims. The dress was made of a coated jersey, which is essentially stretched jersey fabric that has a glossy foil bonded to it by placing a thin sheet of polyurethane between these two fabrics and then applying a heat, which results in their combination. Essentially, the fabric will have the sheen of the foil, but also the stretch capabilities of the jersey, resulting in this shiny but body-conscious dress. The glove bodysuit bodice isn't something to really be wowed over, and while the draped skirt with a pant-to-shoe underneath is a Demna for Balenciaga staple, it doesn't really feel all that special. There are Balenciaga styles that have been draped in a similar manner, like the Cecile de Rothschild gown from 1948, but for Kim to wear something on the runway that is more or less the same old for her feels a little bit deflated. It would have been great to see her wear something far more avant-garde on the runway in order to give her fans something to be wowed by. I was gonna make a mean comment, but like, I'm holding off on that. Nicole Kidman was the last of the non-model celebs to walk the runway, and hers was the most unfortunate of the VIP styles. The dress is another draped taffeta style, but it's been bonded with a silver coating that gives the fabric the look of reflective wrapping paper that nobody really wants on Christmas that's been wound around Kidman. Instead of the wrung-out strap, the asymmetrical drape covers a singular clavicle and part of Kidman's shoulder, while the draped waist results in a train that forms at the right side. The train is both a train, but is also attached to the skirt of the actual dress and exposes the leg to a degree when Kidman walks, but it's really of little consequence. The dress could be a technical masterpiece, but the nature of the textile makes it hard to think, look, or care for anything but its baked potato-ness. A black ball gown called the Incognito was anything but, as its volume is hard to miss, and the fact that it was also then worn by Naomi Campbell, who only furthered the whole notion. The gown is constructed of black silk taffeta with a bouffant ball gown skirt that Demna has been playing with for seasons intermittently. But these versions play to styles that Balenciaga showed in his 1939 collections, which were said to be inspired by the portraits of Spanish painters like Goya and Velázquez from the 17th to the 19th centuries, and had, quote, many formal gowns with full skirts inspired by dresses of the 1880s too. This taffeta gown is large and reminds one of the bodacious skirts of royalty like an infanta or an empress, whose portraits would have inspired a very young Balenciaga when he visited the house of the Marquesa de Casa Torres, his home in Spain as a little kid. You know what I mean? He got a lot of inspiration from the portraits, and then he kind of turned that into like his fashion inspo. Now, Demna's own version of the dresses of royalty sees Naomi Campbell exist in a conical bustier which rises around her neck and head. The bustier is dramatic but also architectural and sculptural, and when Campbell walks, she gives the gown an air of intangibility, like royalty often did and still does to a degree for a lot of people. A large pink draped gown with train and bouffant skirt is a more formal version of the taffeta cocktail versions we saw earlier. In reality, these dresses might seem very unpractical, and they are, but when Balenciaga himself showed bustle gowns inspired by the Victorian age, but in the late 1930s and early 1940s, those fashions were 60 years out of date at the time too. Demna is following Balenciaga's own journey, but instead of going full bustle inspired like Monsieur Balenciaga did, he's looking at the ball and gala formals that Balenciaga was making dresses for when he first started. The finale dress was one that caused quite a stir, as the models had a difficult time getting through doorways and tight passages as she walked. But with all due respect to her, as she did have a literal floor-length veil impeding her eyesight, I'm gonna let it go. The dress was made up of a chalk silk tulle and then had a silver floral embroidered veil that went from the model's head to below the hem of the skirt, but did expose the backless nature of the dress and a portion of the skirt too, but it did kind of allow us to see the embroidery on the skirt that was floral as well. The last look gives us a little time to speak about the walks of the models who aren't, you know, inherently models. Do I think they walked well? Absolutely not. It was awkward and strange and very uncomfortable to watch. But I do think that they fit into Demna's new idea of haute couture at Balenciaga, without a doubt. While established haute couture clients would never want to wear something an actress or reality star had already worn on the red carpet, the new client that Demna has already shown he is able to tap into might be inspired by dresses on those stars. And it's even gone to the point where that first Balenciaga collection was so good that Balenciaga has actually opened up an haute couture boutique at the brand's sacred Avenue Georges V that will house both a men's and women's department, selling exclusive and limited edition bags, shoes, and clothes with the ability to customize those products in the ateliers upstairs. The Balenciaga of the 20th century is gone, unfortunately. But this new Balenciaga moving its way through the idea of couture, but in the present tense. It's intriguing, but it's really hard for me to be angry about that. You know what I mean? Like, we kind of got to work with what we got. Demna has handled Balenciaga's haute couture in a way that goes against everything the original house stood for. But Karl Lagerfeld also said Coco Chanel would have hated what he did with her namesake label too. Balenciaga as an haute couture brand died because of Cristobal Balenciaga's unwillingness to adapt to how clothing making was changing in 1968. And that's admirable. Shout out to Allege. But Demna is trying to reignite the handcrafted nature of clothing making in an age where ready-to-wear dominates. And I'm at a point where it kind of is what it is, and we're all just along for the ride. In the meantime, I'm gonna enjoy the old and the new sights along the road. That's kind of my review for Balenciaga. It wasn't really that bad. There was a lot of good historical shit going on. It's just, you have to know to look for it. But I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments down below. Please tell me what you thought of the collection. Was it good? Was it bad? With this sort of extra context, do you feel a little bit less angry, pitchforky, you know, fired torch about it? Or are you still like... But thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys in the next video, and TTYL.